Okay? All right. So, how many of you were here yesterday? Some of you were here. I see a lot of familiar faces. That's great. Okay, so I'm just going to mention again that the Ruth Institute is an international interfaith coalition to defend the family and build a civilization of love. And you can sign up to receive our newsletter. If you do it electronically, you will also receive immediately, or within 24 hours, a free ebook that we have developed called Protecting Your Family from the Top 5 Gay Myths. And this is something you could send along to the bishops in Germany to explain to them that science is not really on their side, for example. But in any case, you can join our newsletter in that way. I think I've lost both of my helpers. If I could get somebody to circulate this clipboard, you could sign it up. Could I get you to? Here comes Gino. Okay. You'll see the QR code is right on here. So you can click on that, or if you don't know how, you can get a 14-year-old to explain to you how to do that. And you can sign up immediately, or you can sign up the old-fashioned way with paper and pen. So, but in any case, we would love to have you as part of what we're doing there at the Ruth Institute. So I'm going to send you these slides. If you sign up one way or the other, you will receive these slides. And these slides have been specially prepared to share with you. Throughout the slides, you're going to see color-coded slides. In green, there are tactical tips. In red, there are references. And in brownish orange, there are organizations. So when you have these slides and you are trying to think, what was the name of that organization she mentioned, you can just go right to the brown slides and you'll find it a lot faster that way. So the slides have been particularly prepared with that in mind. So for instance, here at the very beginning, we just link you directly, and these slides are live, so when you click on the links, they'll take you places. If you click on the YouTube images, it'll take you right to the YouTube video and so on, okay? But here we just introduce you to the basic resources of the Ruth Institute so you can find out, find access to the information. So I'd like to have, first of all, everybody who was here yesterday, would you please stand up for me? Okay, thank you so much for being there. And I want everybody to look around and realize these guys were here yesterday and they know what I talked about yesterday. So if you want to know, you can talk to them. Next, I want everyone to stand up, please. Everyone stand up. Everyone, come on. I'm not going to make you do anything crazy. Come on. Okay, if you are a baptized Catholic, please sit down. All right, my brothers and sisters, I want to thank you so much for being here with us. Can we have a round of applause for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters? And I'm afraid you're going to hear me talk directly to my Catholic brothers and sisters here for a minute, so I wanted to make sure you knew that I knew you were here before we get started with that. So, the Catholic Church, as I suppose everybody knows, is a worldwide billion-member organization filled with sinners. Okay, we've got some crazy people, we got some knuckleheads, we got some people who are doing things they shouldn't be doing. And that's just the people who happen to be alive today. If we get started going back 2,000 years, we got a lot of crazy people. Now, why am I mentioning this to you? Because there will be times when you will have to apologize for the conduct of your fellow Catholics. That's going to happen. As a matter of justice, as a matter of charity, there are going to be times when you're going to have to say, yeah, that guy's off the edge, or whatever, right? But you must never apologize for the church's teaching. You must never apologize for the doctrine. Particularly, you must never apologize for the church's teaching on marriage, family, and human sexuality. You must never apologize for the doctrine, no matter what the crazy people are doing. And the church's teaching is universal, it is humane, it is reasonable, and it applies to everybody. As Roman Catholics, we have no right to keep this to ourselves. We have no right to keep it to ourselves. We've got to be talking to people about it because it's going to be helpful. Now, the overall theme that I want to start with is to say that, is to just give you a little bit different way of looking at some of the things we've been dealing with. You could think about us as having a sexual constitution. Now, you guys, does New Zealand have a written constitution? I know the British don't. Okay, all right. In the U.S., we have a written constitution. So what the Constitution, whether it's written or unwritten, what it does is it gives you the rules of the game. It tells you how your ordinary laws are going to be made, how they're going to be enforced, how they're going to be interpreted. The Constitution creates the framework within which everything else is conducted. All the decisions are made, okay? And that's true whether it's written or unwritten. So you could say that we have a sexual constitution, that there are rules of the game about who gets to reproduce, who gets to have sex, who gets to be married, and so on and so forth. There is a kind of sexual constitution. At one time, our societies, America, most of the English-speaking world, were governed by something that you could think of as a Christian sexual constitution. The basic rules that everybody understood were inspired in some way, even if they weren't legal, they were inspired in some way by Christian understanding of marriage and family and human sexuality. I think it is safe to say we no longer have that. Right? We no longer have a Christian sexual constitution. We have lost it. It has been replaced by the sexual revolutionary constitution. We have a new set of rules of the game that we all have to play under, whether we like it or not. There are new rules. Now, we lost this piecemeal, like one little thing at a time. It was just one little thing, just this one little thing. Come on, what's wrong with you? It's not that big a deal, right? That's how we lost it, piecemeal. I don't think we're going to get it back piecemeal. Okay, and I'm not sure how we're going to get it back, but I do think that it's very important for those of us who would like to get it back that we have a clear picture of what it is we're trying to achieve. Because the clear picture, the overall picture, is much more attractive than the current picture that we're dealing with. It's much more attractive. But each little step may not be particularly attractive. And so if you can't embed it within the larger picture, it's going to be a tougher sell. That's my opinion about where we stand today. So the basic outline of the presentation, I'm going to talk with you about understanding the sexual revolution and the sexual state. And then I'm going to talk with you about how we can resist it and what we can do about it. All right? So my book, The Sexual State, as was mentioned, basically answers the question, what is the sexual revolution? How do we get to it? And where did it come from? If you thought of this book as being a catalog of crazy things that are going on, the poor little book was out of date the minute it was printed because crazy stuff continues to be accumulating, right? So what it actually is a structure that allow you to understand each new thing as it comes up. So you don't have this feeling, which I know a lot of you do have the feeling, we're just being barraged with craziness from left and right and all over the place. But if you have a framework for understanding, there's really only 3 big ideas that you have to master. And then you can put everything within that framework and it's not so overwhelming, a little bit easier to manage. Okay, so the 3 big ideas of the sexual revolution, I mentioned some of this yesterday, but we'll go into it more detail today. The idea of the sexual revolution is that a good and decent society should do everything possible to separate sex from babies. I call that the contraceptive ideology. The second point is that a good and decent society should do everything possible to separate both sex and babies from marriage. And I call that the divorce ideology. And I spoke about that quite a bit yesterday when we were talking about family breakdown and the harms that people experience and the impact, the psychological impact that family breakdown has on people. So there's going to be more detail from yesterday on this particular point. And then finally, the sexual revolutionaries hold that a good and decent society should do everything possible to wipe out all the differences between men and women, except for those that individuals specifically choose to bear. And we call that the gender ideology. Now, if you want to learn more about any of these ideologies, I have 45-minute talks on each one of them, which are shown here on the screen. And you can see it's bright red, so you can easily find it once you have the slides, okay? And we have additional resources from conferences that we have given that cover the contraceptive ideology. Each one of these topics, we have accumulated more and more information at the Ruth Institute website and YouTube channel. And so I'm going to give you now your first tactical tip. We have out here a wide range of ages of people here, but I'm going to say this to everyone, regardless of how old you are. If you will study a topic for 30 minutes a day, at the end of 5 years, you will be an expert in that topic. 30 minutes a day for 5 years, you'll be an expert. Some of you say, but I'm 75 years old. I'll be 80. You're going to be 80 anyway, so you might as well be 80 and an expert in something, okay? Those of you who are younger, you have a long period of time to use whatever you set out to learn to make your thing. So let's say a few words about each of these three ideologies, and then we'll talk about how to resist the sexual revolution. The contraceptive ideology, the next slide I'm going to show you, is one that my Protestant friends don't necessarily understand, but I think you guys will see the point of it. There's this nice image of Paul VI, Humana Vitae, I told you so, right? I mean, he knew this was not going to be a good thing, okay? So what the contraceptive ideology has done to us, and what the contraceptive ideology at its core really is, it's a claim that sex is intrinsically a sterile activity with no moral or social significance, and you pretty much get to do whatever you want, and nothing bad will happen. Right, this is the kind of fantasy, you could say, of the contraceptive ideology. I'm going to say a couple words about the difference between the technology and the ideology, because sometimes you'll hear people say, the pill changed everything. Well, last I looked, the pill is an inanimate object that is not capable of doing anything. Right? It's what we do with the inanimate objects that adds up to something. So I'm going to say a few words about that in a moment. And then finally, I want to say just a few words of the many that could be said about what contraception has done to society. Okay? What has it done to society? Now, I know Father Bouquet is going to give you a theological talk about contraception and what it's done, looking at it from the supernatural realm. I'm a social scientist. I'm going to tell you about what's going on in the natural realm, okay, that anybody should be able to observe for themselves, whether they're Roman Catholic or not. They should be able to see the things that we're talking about. So let's briefly talk about the ideology versus the technology. There's something called the first demographic transition. I'm going to totally nerd out on you here, guys, but I think this is very fascinating. The first demographic transition is the fact that fertility declined by half in Europe over a period of some 200 years, okay? And this was discovered by a demographer in 1929. He figured out, gee whiz, people are not having as many babies as they used to. And it was based on evidence looking over the past 200 years. And so this raises the question, how did they do it? The FDA only approved the pill in 1960. How in the world did these people manage to reduce their fertility by half over this period of time? So the question is, you know, here we have the jolly peasants of France. They're having fewer babies. Why and how did they accomplish this without technological hormonal assistance? Well, there are several ways that demographers can tell you that are very reliable. One, you can have delayed age at first marriage as a social cultural norm. You have to go through certain hoops in order to be allowed to get married and reproduce, okay? And cultures can do that. You can use periodic abstinence, which is a method that, of course, we understand to be related to natural family planning and so on. You can have extended lactation. In some cultures, women nurse their babies for 2 years, okay? This will have a tendency to reduce fertility, all right? And then you can also have what is called coitus interruptus. Now, of these four methods, the first three are certainly morally acceptable in pretty much any culture you would imagine. No religion has any objection to these methods, with the possible exception of the fourth, as I mentioned. And so we conclude that the point of the pill was not to reduce fertility. That was not the sole point of it. The point of the pill was to make it possible to have sex in circumstances where you didn't want to have a baby. Okay, so if a married couple, if their periodic abstinence doesn't work exactly right and they have a new little baby, a surprise baby, everybody dotes on that baby. It's not the end of the world. But if you're having sex with your boss who's married to someone else, it's a bigger problem if your contraception fails, okay? So the point of the pill was to change what was considered acceptable sexual behavior. Now, this book that I wrote, which we also have copies of, we call it The Sexual Revolution and Its Victims. And as you can see, there's an image of Marilyn Monroe on the cover, which we feel is a very apt image of both the sexual revolution and its victims. Because why? She's a symbol of beauty and sexual arousal and so on and so on. She's a sex symbol, you know, she always was. But she died tragically young, according to her biographer, she had 12 abortions, okay? So her life was actually quite miserable, all right? Even though you can still get posters with her and she still looks glamorous and everything. And so to talk about her is to kind of see some of the dark side of the sexual revolution. So this collection of essays, the reason I'm mentioning it here is this collection of essays, there's 35 essays in the book. There are quite a few that are about contraception and the contraceptive ideology. So if you want more information, that'd be another place to go. Now, next, I want to just point out this brochure that is in your packets. If you can easily get to it, pull out your packet and you could take a look at this brochure. If you don't have it in front of you, you can look at it a little bit later. But this is what we call the survivors of the sexual revolution, the brochure called The Survivors of the Sexual Revolution. And there are, on that brochure, you'll see 12 different categories of people who have been harmed in some way by the sexual revolution. And what I want to just point out at this moment is that some of them are specifically victims of the contraceptive ideology. Okay, specifically, people like the post-abortive women, whom you all are familiar with from your work, right? This was kind of the first victim of the sexual revolution. The people identified that participating in this thing was not all it was cracked up to be, and it hurts people, okay? So she's a victim of the contraceptive ideology. The heartbroken career woman, the woman who put off having children, until she's 35, or she's gotten tenure, or she's made partner in the law firm. And then she finds out she's neither married nor fertile any longer. And by the time she figures it out, it's too late to do anything about it. Many heartbroken women in this regard. People who cohabit or who hook up and then later have regrets about it. And then people who end up with medical problems as a result of either their participation in the hookup culture, their use of contraception, their use of abortion. All of these people have been harmed by the lie that is the contraceptive ideology. Now, I'm going to mention one other thing about the contraceptive ideology, which is that it has, under the heading of what has contraception done to society, it's created many distortions in the economy, but I want to just point out one. The whole economy has reorganized itself around the idea of delayed fertility, hasn't it? Okay? And so what that means is that the price of entry into the professions is delayed fertility. The professions and higher education are no more friendly to mothers today than they were in 1955. That's a fact. The way you get into the professions is you postpone fertility. All right? And so we have Kathy Newman here being completely befuddled by Jordan Peterson. And who is she? Think about it. She's at the peak of the BBC. Right? She's the on-air personality for a major TV. Right? And what's happened is that the people who value marriage and family are systematically less likely to get promoted through the system in comparison with people who are willing to abort or contracept in order to achieve their career goals. And so there's going to be tend to be a skewing. There's not a rule that says, there's no law, there's no written constitution that says you have to, that this is how things have to be, but there's a systematic tendency to draw from one set of people with one set of views rather than others. We can see this in the United States in our Supreme Court. Amy Coney Barrett was, when she was nominated, people were completely freaked out that this woman with 7 children was being nominated for the Supreme Court. There's no rule that says you can't have 7 children to be on the Supreme Court, but it's a fact that the 2 women who were on the court, Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor, both of them are childless women. Okay, that's just how it is. And our most recent woman on the Supreme Court doesn't even know what a woman is, as it turns out, so I'm not sure whether we should count her as a woman because, well, whatever, why? But anyway, you see the point. This is a systematic selection of one kind of people at the expense of the other. And many of you have experienced this in your heart, as you're making your career and family decisions. So this is something to keep in mind. These are the people who are deciding what counts as news, what the headlines are going to be, what photos are going to go with those headlines. That's what we're up against, okay? And the contraceptive ideology has done this. I don't know if anybody planned it, but that's how it's working out for us, okay? Now, the divorce ideology. When the Ruth Institute talks about the divorce ideology, we include much more than just divorce. It's any plan that separates children from their one or both parents apart from an unavoidable tragedy. Any adult plan that would do that. So it includes unmarried parenthood, it includes third-party reproduction, IVF, all of that is included under the heading of adult choices that separate children from one of their parents. We talked about this yesterday, that the impact of divorce on children has been very strongly studied for at least 30 years. This chart is something the Ruth Institute put together. It's in a brochure we have called Divorce and Children. And it shows some of the risk factors that kids have when their parents separate, okay? And this is just from divorce. You could do another whole analysis on children of single parents and so on. We haven't studied the children of donor conception very much, so we don't know as much about them. But you can sort of anticipate this is not going to be great from their perspective. I alluded also to this document that was created by our friend Dr. Pat Fagan. That's a 40-page document on divorce and children, right? 300 footnotes, people. This is not a one-off, right? Everything you can imagine, whether it's academic achievement, health, psychological well-being, ability to form relationships, in all of that, the children of divorce are at risk. Now, question is, why is that? The facts are undeniable. No honest person can deny that these are the facts. Why is that? And I think it's because at the root, there's a theological reason why that is, and that is that the foundation of the child's personality is the love of mother and father for each other, okay? The stability of your parents' union and the love of mother and father for each other is the foundation of the child's personality. The physical child is the result, you could say, the incarnation, right, of the parents' love. It's a physical representation of their love. If that love goes away, it's a big problem from the child's perspective, okay? The kids are not really so resilient. And one thing we see is with people where their parents have divorced and remarried, often the remarriage is the hardest part because the kids are going from one house to the next. They're seeing their new half-siblings have a full, stable life with their mother and father. Their half-siblings have photos on the wall that include their whole family tree. But when I'm at my mom's house, there's only pictures of me with my mom and my mom's side of the family. There's nothing with me and my mom and dad. And same way when I go to dad's house. And this is what the children go through week after week as they move back and forth between two homes. And the divorce can have lifelong impacts. It does have lifelong impacts. People cynically say it's the gift that keeps on giving because just so many things continue to happen. I have a dear friend in Lake Charles who said to me one day, she said, Jenny, my parents got divorced when I was 5 and it's still a problem. I said, what's going on? And she said, my dad is dying. My stepmom will not allow me and my sisters to go and be with him while he's dying. Now you say that's exceptionally harsh, but the point is there's nothing within the divorce ideology or the divorce law that prevents that from happening. Of course it doesn't happen all the time, but there's a problem that is at the structure and at the heart of that family. Who benefits from the divorce ideology? This is an image of our friend Steve Baskerville, who has who's produced some very important work on the subject of the implications of divorce for society. What we call the family law bar, the divorce attorneys, they consistently oppose any meaningful divorce reform in the United States. That's the way it is. Why? Because they're making money. The family law attorneys are making money off of divorce. And not just off divorce, but off of managing post-divorce conflict. That's their bread and butter for a lot of these guys. And I know very good Catholic attorneys who leave family law because they can't take it anymore, right? And what does that do? It leaves the field to the guys who are really predatory, right? So this is another structural kind of problem. The family courts have enormous power over the life of the family, and there are people who enjoy that kind of power, right? Who enjoy that kind of pettiness. And when you have a vindictive spouse and she or he will go to court and get things done to the other person and so on, it can be very ugly, and it's structurally permitted and in fact encouraged, right? So you might be nice people and that might not happen, but if you get somebody who's really, out to get you, they now have the weapons of the state at their service. And there are some people who kind of like that. And then finally, the divorce ideology is supported by people who kind of enjoy indulging themselves sexually and want to think that it's okay to just move on to the next partner. We could point out that divorce removed the presumption that marriage would be permanent. Okay, no-fault divorce, in the United States at least, and I suppose here too, no-fault divorce says the government will take sides with the person who wants the marriage the least. That's what low-fault divorce means. One party can say, I'm pulling the plug on this thing. So you remove the presumption that marriage is permanent, but you also remove the presumption that marriage is sexually exclusive. Why? Because adultery is no longer a marital fault. There's no such thing as a marital fault, right? You're like dating, right? If you get a better deal, you move on, and there's literally no legal or social penalty for that. And so the presumptions of permanence and sexual exclusivity have been removed by this very bad public policy of no-fault divorce. Now I'm going to give you one tactical tip on this point, which is that I recommend that whatever you specialize in, and I know everybody has to specialize in things, you can't know everything about everything, but I would recommend that you prepare yourself to address all of the aspects of the sexual revolution, at least a little bit. And the reason is, if you're not ready, your opponents will sense your weak spot and they'll zoom right in on that weak spot. Right? So you can't freak out if somebody says, well, what about divorce? You have to be ready to have something to say. If you don't know what to say, come find us at the Ruth Institute. We probably have it. But the point is, this is why it's important that you have something to say about the whole thing. Okay. All right. Now, here is a very helpful organization. This is the first of several helpful organizations I'm going to recommend to you. This is a group called Them Before Us, and it's something that helps people understand the divorce ideology. And the idea of the name Them Before Us means the kids come before us, the adults. Let's put the kids first in all of this. So this is Miss Katie Faust. We gave her an award a couple of years ago because we like her work so much. But she has a lot of very helpful stuff. All right, now, the part you've all been waiting for. The part Michelle coached me on to make sure that I was going to cover this, which is the gender ideology. We're all freaked out about the gender ideology, and with good reason. The original gender ideology, you could say, was feminism, all right? Because feminism taught everybody, and this I'm now talking about early feminism of the kind I grew up with, in the 70s and 80s, and some of you probably experienced this too. Men and women are identical, except women are better. Right? Isn't that about the size of it? Okay. Therefore, it is a moral imperative to wipe out all differences between men and women. All social, legal, political, cultural differences between men and women, they are evidence of injustice, and they've all got to go. Okay? That's the original version of gender ideology. Now, the new gender ideology is we're going to wipe out all the differences between men and women. Of course, we're not going to say we were wrong. We've never been wrong ever, 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 even though we've contradicted ourselves within the last 5 minutes. We will never admit we were wrong. But we're going to wipe out all the differences between men and women except the ones that the people specifically choose to embrace. So now we have men who wear fingernail polish and dresses and want to say, this is sufficient to make me into a woman. Is that stereotyping or what? I mean, personally, I've been a woman my whole life. I'm just going to put this out there. I've been a woman my whole life, okay? And I don't dress the way Bruce Jenner dresses, okay? I'm just going to put that out there. And I don't see anybody here dressed like Bruce Jenner. Anyway, okay, so who is benefiting from the gender ideology? What is this all about? Well, there are a number of large foundations, mostly but not entirely, based in the United States, that are, some of which are funded by self-described gay men, okay? And they're pushing the whole of the gender ideology, including the transgender aspect of it. So there are a number of big tech guys who made a lot of money in tech, and they're billionaires, and they're gay, and they're spreading their money around to get this done. But more ominously, I think, is that some of these foundations have ties to pharmaceutical companies. These are family members of people. There's a family foundation, and where did the family foundation's money come from? Pharmaceuticals. Why is this important? If you can convince a 14-year-old that they were born in the wrong body, that child is going to need a lifetime of pharmaceutical intervention. It's actually very simple when you get right down to it. You can't sustain the illusion of being in the wrong body without a lot of chemical help, okay? And of course, I've noticed that most of the big advocates of the trans movement are men, not women. And in fact, there are a number of radical feminists and lesbians who are up in arms about this, who despise the whole trans movement, right? The L's and the T's of the LGBT coalition, the L's and T's are in complete open warfare with one another. Now, what does the term transgender even mean? Now, I have on the slide here a list of possible things that the term transgender could mean. You'll see items 1 through 6 with some subpoints. All right, I want to tell you where this list came from. A couple years ago, I invited Dr. Aaron Brewer to come and speak at our Summit for Survivors of the Sexual Revolution. And I said, Aaron, I want you to help people understand the psychology of the trans-minded young person, particularly because we had been hearing that people going to Planned Parenthood clinics are now not exclusively going there just to get abortions or contraception, they're also going to get cross-sex hormones. And the sidewalk counselors outside on the sidewalk didn't know what to say, right? They'd never been trained. You know, there's a lot of training to prepare people for pro-life interventions on the sidewalk, but they didn't know what to say. So we at the Ruth Institute, we got wind of this. By the way, is this happening here in New Zealand? Are you all who are on the sidewalks, are you hearing that there's the Planned Parenthood and these clinics are giving out cross-sex hormones? I'm seeing, okay. If it hasn't happened, it will be coming soon. Sorry to say, a lot of these bad things start in the US and spread around. But anyway, the Ruth Institute created a pamphlet for the sidewalk counselors to use. And so when we introduced it, I said, Aaron, will you come and explain to people a little bit about the psychology of the trans-minded person? So she gave a 15-minute presentation, which is linked here if you want to see the whole thing. But this is one of her slides that she had. And I want to tell you just briefly, go through just a couple of these. The very first one is the so-called intersexed individual, okay? The intersex individual is a person who has a medically diagnosable condition where either their genitalia are not what would be considered normal, or they have some kind of chromosomal issue, okay? The existence of intersex individuals is very important to the ideology because they're trotted out to say, see, you see here, male and female doesn't exhaust the whole spectrum of possible sexualities. And then once people go, oh yeah, that's a little different, then those people are safely escorted off the stage where no one can ask them any further questions, because what they're dealing with is not that they're a third gender, they're dealing with a disorder of sexual development, which typically these disorders, not only are they medically diagnosable, but they typically leave the person sterile. All right, so if you think of the sexual function as having a telos, having an end, having a purpose, which we are okay with thinking like that as Catholics, most of the modern world is not okay with that, but we're okay with that. Okay, so you have a sexual system, a part of the body that is not functioning towards its proper end. You can say that's a disorder, okay? And you're not meaning any disrespect to the person, it's just a fact that it's not working right, okay? But what the activists want to say is that's not what it means. What it means is that we're being narrow when we say male and female exhausts the whole thing, right? So those people never come back into the conversation about transgenderism, if you notice that, okay? They're never brought back up. If you go a little further down the list, you see this word, this funny word you may have never heard before, autogynephiles, okay? Autogynephile is a description of a man who becomes, I don't see any too young ears here, plug that little boy's ear, is a man who becomes aroused by seeing himself in women's clothing. Okay? It is a sexual fetish. And many of the most prominent, visible transgender people fit into this category. And this is something, it doesn't happen in their teen years. It's something that oftentimes these are successful men who have been married, who have fathered families, and they decide that they are women, and they really always have been women. Okay? So Richard Levine, who calls himself Rachel, Bruce Jenner, number of these people, this is what it's about. Okay? You can see already they're very different from the intersex people. Now, a couple more categories in between. Let's skip, briefly. The predator is the person that a lot of people are afraid of, which is the sexual predator who says, I'm really a woman. I want to be housed in a women's prison after I've been convicted of rape. And as you probably know, this is going on in some places. Okay? This is not the only person who's a trans person, but the fact is, the kind of person who wants this is going to be drawn to pin that label on himself, right? Because it gives him certain benefits. The pretender. This is the mediocre male athlete who decides he's a girl so he can win. Is that simple enough? Okay, I mean, that's what this is. Very different again from the other people on the list, right? And the trans activists assure us that none of these people exist. There are no predators, there are no pretenders. They're really all trans people. Like, what? Right? You can't even as a theoretical possibility, you can't imagine somebody pinning this label on it? Okay, well, whatever. Munchausen by proxy. Munchausen syndrome is basically a fancy word for hypochondriac, okay, being a hypochondriac, taking pleasure in your sickness. Munchausen by proxy is you're focused on your child's sickness or somebody else's sickness. There are some mothers who are all focused on how their child is trans, and it's really about the mother, not about the child in those cases, okay? And then finally, we have the people at the bottom of the list, the teenager with rapid onset gender dysphoria. These are your teens who showed no signs of gender incongruity ever, but they've been on chat rooms for a while, and they come out and they are convinced by this peer group that this is their full identity. So the point of putting this up there is for you to see that we've got one word that is being used to mean 6 different things. And as I mentioned, you can get Aaron Brewer's full take on all of this if you go listen to that. So the next tactical tip that I want to put in your mind, when someone uses one word to mean 6 different things, they're up to no good. That confusion is deliberate. That confusion is purposeful. And you must not let yourself be sucked into it, okay? You have got to watch your language. You must not use their language. Okay, they've invented this for a purpose. And I noticed in the most recent issue of the Family Life International magazine, there's a whole page that goes through language issues, what words you should use, what words you shouldn't use. This is another whole area where that is definitely germane. Now, my personal favorite way of describing this is to say, for example, Bruce Jenner is a man who says he's a woman. This is an undeniably true statement. I'm not saying he's gender confused or anything like that. I don't know why he says he's a woman, but he says he's a woman. Okay, so that's a true statement. You can say you need to say true things. That's a point. Okay, now, very briefly, the contradictory visions of the gender ideology. The original feminist ideology said men and women are identical. We got to treat everybody differently. Treat everybody the same. Back in the Clinton administration, there was a big push to get equality between men and women's sports in high school, in college and high school. And in order to accomplish this, what they did is they literally went around shutting down men's wrestling programs. Because there were too many men, you see, and not enough women, so they had to get rid of men's activities for the sake of equality. They redefined dance as a competitive sport because girls were interested in that, okay? So this is what the form of the gender ideology meant back in the 90s, all right? Now, of course, we know the very same law, Title IX of the Civil Rights Act, is being used to say that everybody should be allowed to compete in sports based on the sex that they say they are. Okay, that's the exact same law being completely interpreted differently. Every sane person, every person in this room knows that this interpretation of law will be the end of women's sports. Is there the slightest doubt about this? No, it's the end of women's sports. If a man can come into a wrestling match and win, the girls are going to stop. The parents are not going to let the girls go wrestle or box with men. That's not going to happen. You see in this slide, this referee is disgusted that he has to say this boy won by beating up a bunch of girls. Okay, I mean that's what the look on the man's face says it all. So the challenge for us is to say, how do these two? What are people thinking that they can go from one to the other? Is there some, concept that makes this make sense in their minds? And I think what it is that in both cases they're saying that the body is unimportant. The body can be transcended, whether you're looking at early feminism or you're looking at modern transgenderism. The body is unimportant. We can socially reconstruct everything to take away the significance of the body. That's what feminism was trying to do. Or we can medically and technologically reconstruct things to make the differences between men and women go away. Okay? That's how it fits together in their minds. I think that's important for us to understand as we're trying to confront them. In this section of the talk, I have several groups and organizations to recommend to you. We have a couple of activist groups that are doing very good work in the United States, and these are all in the United States. Do you guys have drag queen story hours over here? Oh, you do? Okay. So I don't know if you have tradition family property, and I know you don't have mass resistance, but you can reach out to these people for resources probably if you wanted to do something at the activist level. There are several organizations that provide research and legal help. Again, these are US-based organizations. You're going to need to develop somebody that deals with the law here. And then finally, there are several parent support groups, which are definitely relevant to anybody you know who is struggling with this, who have a family member struggling with this. They'll want to be aware of the Partners for Ethical Care and the Parents of Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria Kids. Those organizations, you can connect with them online, and that'll be very helpful to people. So why did the sexual revolution pivot to transgenderism so quickly after the United States said we're going to have same-sex marriage in our country? Why did that happen? How did that happen? My answer is because gay marriage was never really about gay marriage in the first place. It was never really about marriage. It was really about destabilizing the sex of the body. It was about removing the sex of the body as a legal category, as a legally recognized category. That's what gay marriage, that whole debate about redefining marriage, that's what it was really about. And there are a number of reasons you can figure that out. For the true revolutionary, this is what you have to keep in mind. The issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. The issue is always the revolution, and the revolution is always about power and the accumulation of power. That's what it's all about. And this zeroes in on the problem with the sexual revolution. They want to separate sex from babies. Guess what? Sex makes babies. They want to say that we're going to separate sex and babies from marriage. Guess what? Kids actually need their parents. They want to say there are no differences between men and women. That's unimportant. Guess what? The body is actually significant. And so we can conclude the sexual revolution is irrational. It is impossible. It cannot be done. And therefore, it requires constant propping up. It requires force. It requires propaganda nonstop. And it is a totalitarian ideology that no Christian should have anything to do with. If you want to build society around the idea that sex makes babies, that idea will be reinforced by events on a daily basis. Right? You're going to see evidence of that. If you're going to try to build a society around the idea that there are no differences between men and women, you're going to have daily problems getting that done because the differences are going to appear. And so this is why So many people have been wounded. Because the sexual revolution is irrational, people are getting hurt, right? People are being wounded, damaged. You can see that as we look through this chart. Because it is impossible and undoable, the sexual revolution needs the state. This is the key insight. This is what the book, The Sexual State, is all about. Because it cannot be done, but we feel we have to do it, you've got to have the power of the state in order to make it happen. I'm going to briefly cover a few ways in which the state is involved so that you can see what we need to do, what you need to be resisting, because you know some part of it, but there's a lot of different pieces to it. 3 categories: judicial rulings, legislation, and most interestingly, regulatory agencies, okay? Judicial rulings, we're all familiar with the fact that the US Supreme Court ruled that abortion on demand is legal, and so on and so forth. We're familiar with that. But the judiciary goes much deeper than that, because from the bench, there are biased rulings being handed down every day on things like what you can present as evidence. We interviewed Mr. Paul Jonah here, who is one of the attorneys for David Daleiden, okay? David Daleiden is one of the guys who's undercover journalist, uncovered terrible things that Planned Parenthood was doing. Of course, he's the one in trouble now, all right? And what Paul told us is that the judges in the case would be saying, you can't produce this as evidence. Here's the legal issue. No, that's not the legal issue. One of these judges should have recused himself. He had connections to Planned Parenthood. So the corruption of the judiciary goes further than just the rulings that they're coming out with. They're manipulating the system all the way along. This is a way in which the sexual state is propping up Planned Parenthood and the other aspects of the sexual revolution. They create special legislation. In the United States, there is now a movement to try to regulate, and I mean to regulate out of existence, pregnancy care centers like like the ones you guys have here, okay? And they're doing this by saying, you see this headline, so-called crisis pregnancy centers. You know, they're just anti-abortion propaganda agencies. Yeah, it's crazy what they're doing. But they're getting the state to assist them to suppress their competitors. That's basically what it amounts to. Likewise, there are bans on so-called conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is a pejorative term for people wanting therapeutic help to end or reduce their same-sex attractions. Okay, so these are people who are kind of wrapped into the sexual revolution. They want to step away from it. The sexual revolutionaries don't want to let them step away from it. We're going to block the exits. We're going to make it harder for them. We're going to make it harder for the therapist. The therapist is going to be freaked out that somebody's going to set them up and they're going to lose their license, okay? This is what the state is doing. If this stuff wasn't there, you'd see a lot more people exiting, wouldn't you? You know, you'd see a lot of different behavior without this type of stuff. Finally, I want to say one thing about regulatory agencies, because this is the sneaky stuff, right? We all live in an administrative state where a lot of governance takes place by regulation. And most of us aren't paying attention to what the regulatory agencies are doing. And so a lot of different things happen there. In the United States, there are several that I can mention, but the insurance commissions at the state level are coming up with rulings telling insurance companies, and therefore doctors, what they have to cover as health care. So the insurance commission is saying, if you do anything for chest reconstructive surgery, if somebody has an accident and they need chest reconstructive surgery, that means you must cover the chest reconstructive surgery of a woman who wants to remove her breasts because she's a man. She thinks she's a man, okay? That's literally a ruling from the Insurance Commission of California that came out, okay? Complete manipulation of the system, right? Now, and the state medical boards are becoming the new battleground for transgender stuff. So I don't know if you heard, there was a big hoo-hoo in Florida. That was all a big debate over over the state medical board, right? And that became public because we made it public so that we could get done the kind of rulings that we want. Once you start looking, you're going to see that the sexual state is everywhere, right? You're going to see it's everywhere. It's at work all over the place. And so I want to close with just a couple of ideas about resisting the sexual revolution. that professionals, I want to speak particularly to professionals in the audience, doctors, lawyers, school teachers, librarians, okay? Your skills are needed in these regulatory processes if you can possibly contribute. This is our friend Dr. Quinton Van Meter, who is part of the debate in Florida where he provided testimony saying why this was not good medicine to be giving minors these treatment for trans things. He had the skills and the knowledge, he put it to work. Okay, it's very important if you have those skills that you do that. There are a number of alternative professional societies in the United States that are forming because all the professional societies have been corrupted by the sexual revolution, right? And so therefore there's an alternative pro-life OBGYNs, Christian Medical Association, Catholic Medical Association, American College of Pediatricians, and so on. If you don't have those organizations, you need to get them. Okay, you need to be thinking about that. And these organizations will help you lay the groundwork if that's something that you need. There's one last group that I want to speak to, and that is people who are retired. We've got a wide range of ages here, and I know that some of you who are in your working years are under a lot of pressure to conform. You're under pressure to conform because you may lose your job if you don't do what they think you're supposed to do. Those of us who are beyond that, who are retired, guess what? They can't take your job away because you don't have a job. This is an advantage, right? This is an advantage. You still have your skills, your connections, your knowledge of the industry. You need to put it to work, okay? If you're retired. I want to put that in your mind, that there may be a way for you to participate in a unique way because of your unique situation. Do you remember our friend Cardinal Pell? I'm sure you all remember Cardinal Pell, who is very unjustly treated by the Australian media and by the Australian criminal justice system. He was exonerated. Let's think about how he got exonerated. At the highest level, the Supreme Court of Australia, I don't know exactly what it's called, but at the very high level, nobody's going to push those guys around, right? They can't be bullied. The guys lower down in the pecking order, these multiple levels of appeals and so on that went through, I imagine those guys felt some pressure to conform to what was going on. One step before you get to that Supreme Court, there was one guy who wrote a judgment saying, this is the craziest thing I ever heard. Right? This is ridiculous. And the fact that he said that is what allowed the case to go up to the highest level and therefore be overturned. The person who did that was a retired judge, Judge Mark Weinberg. He kept himself on a list of guys who could be brought in case something this or that happens. And yeah, sure, I'll take cases once in a while. As far as I know, he's not a Catholic or anything like that. But the fact is, he had nothing to lose compared with all the other people in the pecking order. And so what I just want to put into your mind, if Mark Weinberg had decided to play golf that day and not get involved, Cardinal Pell would have died in prison. That's a fact. So I just want to say to all of you retirees, stay involved. Use your skills, use your knowledge, and everyone, please get involved and stay involved because this has gone on long enough. Thank you very much.